I didn't fight through 2 wars, a marriage, and a raccoon infestation just to get robbed by a guy named Derek with a clipboard, Grandpa Clyde muttered, tightening the last hinge on a makeshift nail gun made entirely from old plumbing parts and duct tape. He squinted across the lawn at the unmarked white van parked in front of their house, where 3 HOA officials were unloading a leaf blower that used to belong to him. Inside the van, stacked in smug little rows, were the rest of their tools. Tools that had built Tina's swing set. Tools that fixed Jake's bike. Tools his wife had given him 40 years ago for their anniversary, right before she ran off with a botanist. That van wasn't just holding screwdrivers. It was holding history. So Clyde stood up, wiped his hands on his grease-stained pants, and calmly said, "It's time." The day had started like most others in their quaint, overly regulated neighborhood of Sunnyridge Acres. Birds chirped with an almost corporate optimism. Lawns were all mowed exactly 2.5 inches high, HOA mandated, of course. And every mailbox had the same smiley sunflower decal. It was eerie, if not downright sinister. Clyde sat on the porch sipping lukewarm coffee, watching his daughter Tina argue with a younger man in a pastel polo. "You can't just take people's tools," Tina shouted, barefoot in pajama pants. "The bylaws clearly state that all visible yard equipment must be stored out of sight, and your shed is non-compliant," Derek replied, smug behind his Oakleys. "It's locked." "You broke the lock," she yelled. "Which was also a violation," Derek added, jotting notes on his tablet like he was writing the next Constitution. Jake, Tina's 14-year-old son, had just come out with a bowl of cereal when he saw the shed door hanging off one hinge and the family's entire collection of tools missing. "Mom, where's my skateboard wrench?" "In the HOA van," Clyde said, "along with my sanity." That was when it snapped. Not with yelling, not with threats. Clyde just nodded once, slow and purposeful, the way old Western gunslingers do before duels. He stood, walked into the garage, and started preparing. Not just for revenge, for justice. The old kind. The kind where you don't call lawyers. You call screwdrivers. The Smith family had always kept to themselves. Tina moved back into Clyde's home after her divorce, raising Jake while juggling freelance graphic design and community grudges. Clyde had mellowed over the years, but he never forgot how to dismantle a machine from inside out. And, in his mind, the HOA was a machine. 2 hours later, Clyde had assembled a group of the neighborhood's most unconventional minds. Janet, who once built a radio tower out of foil and spatulas to block government thoughts. Lance, a retired children's magician with an arrest record and a penchant for chaos. And Manny, the former HOA president who was impeached after he approved flamingo lawn ornaments. "We're not breaking laws," Clyde told them as he laid out his plan. "We're enforcing balance." "Like Batman?" Jake asked. "More like Batman's angry grandpa," Clyde said. The plan was simple. Wait until the HOA van returned the next morning, like it always did, to patrol the street and harass homeowners for things like overly enthusiastic wind chimes. Then, when the crew stepped out to inspect the Carsons' ornamental rock garden, they'd trap them. Literally. The night was long. Clyde and Jake worked like mad scientists in the garage. Nails. Hinges. A locking rig made from a repurposed garage door motor. Clyde even booby-trapped the handle with industrial adhesive that would weld it shut from the inside. It was part Home Alone, part Saw, and completely illegal, which made it feel righteous. At 7:03 a.m. the next day, the HOA van arrived like clockwork. Derek and his 2 clipboard cronies stepped out and walked toward the Carsons' lawn. Meanwhile, Clyde gave Jake the nod. Janet's jammer blocked all phone signals. Lance, in a full clown suit for no reason, distracted the crew with balloon animals. Clyde rolled out from under the van, hammer in one hand, an industrial rivet gun in the other. By the time the HOA guys noticed something was wrong, the van doors had slammed shut and wouldn't open. "What the?" Derek banged on the window from inside. "Hey, let us out." Clyde stood silently, tapping a nail on the side of the van like a metronome. "Funny thing about bylaws," he said. "They go both ways." The van began to shake as the trapped men panicked. One tried to crawl out the front, only to find the ignition rigged with zip ties. The other discovered a bottle of orange juice Clyde had left inside, labeled, "This expires in 10 minutes." Whether or not it actually did, no one dared test it. News spread like wildfire. Within 20 minutes, the neighborhood gathered with folding chairs and popcorn. Someone brought a grill. Clyde calmly sat in a lawn chair, hammer across his lap, nodding like a king watching a dethroned jester beg for mercy. He even started giving a live workshop on tool safety, using the van as his stage. "Always respect your hammer," he said, as Derek pounded on the inside of the window. "Unlike these boys, who used mine without asking." Tina walked up to him mid-show, still in pajamas. "You know this is insane, right?" Clyde smiled. "No, honey. What they did was insane. This is therapy." The police eventually showed. 2 officers, clearly amused, listened to both sides. They gave Clyde a citation for creating an unpermitted mobile art installation. When asked if the HOA wanted to press charges, Derek refused to admit they had stolen the tools in the first place. "We were collecting them." "So you admit you had them?" the officer asked. Derek opened his mouth, then closed it. The HOA was defeated not by violence, but by logic and spectacle. Clyde hadn't just trapped them physically, he'd nailed them metaphorically, with the full weight of every ridiculous rule they ever enforced. Later that evening, as the sun set and the van sat abandoned like a forgotten exhibit, Jake turned to Clyde. "What now?" Clyde lit a cigar made of cinnamon bark. "Now we start a real neighborhood watch." Jake grinned. "With tools. With justice. And tools." Clyde leaned back in his chair, the van gleaming in the background like a tombstone for tyranny. War may have aged him, but the HOA had awakened something much more dangerous. A bored, retired man with nothing to lose and too many nails to count. Clyde didn't sleep the night after the van incident. He sat in the garage, cross-legged on a crate of old paint cans, drawing blueprints on the back of expired pizza coupons and property tax notices. His hands moved with the precision of someone who had once dismantled a Soviet landmine with a bent spoon. Jake sat nearby, munching on a cold burrito and watching his grandfather sketch what looked like either a Rube Goldberg trap or a homemade exorcism device. Either way, it had nails. "What's that part?" Jake asked, pointing at a coil of wire connected to a door latch and a spring-loaded canister. "That's the automatic hinge freezer," Clyde replied. "Trigger it, and it locks the van's doors like a clam in a thunderstorm." Jake nodded, chewing thoughtfully. "You really think they'll come back?" "Oh, they'll be back," Clyde said. "These HOA boys have egos thicker than the city budget." By sunrise, Operation Nailstorm was born. It was simple, dramatic, and entirely illegal. And it had layers. The van would arrive. The HOA crew would exit. Meanwhile, Clyde would initiate the trap, a blend of mechanical brilliance and low-level insanity. Every element had a purpose, from a hinge freezing mechanism to the scent-triggered alarm that would go off the moment Derek got within 10 feet of Clyde's new decoy, illegal gnome, placed in the garden. They ran a test on the trap later that day using Lance's old delivery van. Lance was excited, having rigged his own layer of flare, a glitter bomb set to explode inside the cab once the last screw sealed the door. For psychological disorientation, he explained, wearing his magician's tuxedo and top hat. Or for sparkle. Janet showed up with a bag of burner phones and a parabolic microphone. "We'll intercept their communications." Got one tuned to HOA frequencies already. Mostly passive-aggressive chatter and someone named Wendy arguing about petunias. Clyde had never felt so alive. Years of creaky knees and back pain seemed to evaporate as he fine-tuned tripwires and coated the inner van locks with an epoxy so stubborn it could bond a rhinoceros to a helicopter. Tina, watching the chaos unfold from the kitchen window, sighed and muttered, "One day, I'm going to write a memoir, and no one's going to believe a word of it." The next morning, at precisely 8:04 a.m., the HOA van returned. Derek stepped out, clipboard in hand, sunglasses angled like he was trying out for a B-grade detective show. His crew followed, discussing how many citations they could issue before lunch. Clyde, hiding behind a hedge, clicked the remote control. Nothing happened. Then everything happened. The van's rear doors swung closed as if yanked by ghosts. Inside, springs activated. Rivets fired. Chains tightened. From a small speaker, Janet's recorded voice played on loop. You are now entering a zone of neighborhood justice. Please remain calm and consider your life choices. Derek lunged back toward the van, but was too slow. The doors were sealed. The handles fused. The window fogged up immediately as one of the trapped HOA crew started hyperventilating. Lance's glitter bomb went off with a muted whoosh, turning the inside of the van into a disco nightmare. Through the tinted windows, sparkles floated like weaponized fairy dust. Outside, Clyde stood tall, hammer in one hand, a cup of lukewarm tea in the other. He took a slow sip, locking eyes with Derek, who was now slapping the window with a laminated HOA right to entry notice. Clyde raised his teacup like a toast and winked. Jake documented everything on his phone. Day 2 of neighborhood justice, he narrated. The perpetrators have been neutralized. The glitter is everywhere. Grandpa smells like motor oil and freedom. Within minutes, neighbors came pouring out. Manny handed out donuts. Janet offered interviews to 2 curious teenagers live streaming on a gaming channel. Even the usually grumpy Mr. Hindley from down the street pulled up a lawn chair and clapped. Then came Tina, arms crossed and eyes twitching. Dad, you sealed people inside a van. They sealed themselves metaphorically, Clyde replied. I just provided the box. People are filming. There are drones. Good, he said. Let the world see what happens when HOA tyranny goes too far. Inside the van, muffled shouts continued. One of the crew tried kicking the back door, only for it to trigger a horn that played the opening riff of Eye of the Tiger. Lance, overcome with pride, began to cry. I've waited my whole life for this moment, he said. I feel reborn. The situation escalated quickly. A local reporter arrived, thinking it was a performance art piece. Clyde gave an interview, while stroking a ferret Janet claimed helped with emotional regulation. When asked if this was a political protest, Clyde simply said, No ma'am, it's pest control. The police were not far behind. This time, they brought backup. An officer tapped the side of the van. You've got HOA members locked inside a booby-trapped vehicle. That's kidnapping, sir. Is it still kidnapping if they trespassed and stole private property? Clyde asked. The officer paused. Do you have proof? Jake held up the original video of the HOA crew stealing their tools from a shed, complete with timestamp and a slow zoom on Derek's smug face. After reviewing the footage, the officers conferred quietly by the cruiser. Eventually, one returned, suppressing a grin. Okay, so technically, you forced them into a situation, but also technically, they were illegally removing property. This is a mess. Welcome to Sunny Ridge, Tina muttered. In the end, the officers issued citations to everyone. Clyde received 1 for unauthorized mechanical trapping. Derek received 3 for theft, property trespassing, and conduct unbecoming of a community representative. The HOA van was declared an ongoing investigation site and remained in Clyde's driveway, glitter and all. As dusk settled, the Smith family sat on the porch. Tina was nursing a headache. Jake was editing the footage into a short film for his media class, and Clyde polished his screwdriver set like a man cleaning metals. What's next, Dad? Tina asked. We reinforce the perimeter. HOA won't give up that easy. And if they try again? Clyde smiled. Then we upgrade to Phase 3. Jake looked up. There's a Phase 3? There's always a Phase 3, Clyde said. And in the garage, tucked behind an old tarp, sat a blueprint labeled in red marker. HOA Disassembly Protocol, Advanced. Below it, in smaller handwriting, includes inflatable decoys, sprinkler misdirection, and the ultimate weapon, paperwork. The war was just beginning, and Grandpa Clyde was ready. The HOA van sat in Clyde's driveway like a forgotten relic of failed tyranny, coated in glitter, rust, and bad decisions. Inside, the air smelled of sweat, bubblegum air freshener, and quiet desperation. Derek sat slumped against the back door, arms crossed, eyes twitching as sparkles clung to every inch of his pastel polo. His two fellow enforcers weren't faring much better. One had turned a clipboard into a makeshift fan, while the other muttered incoherently about bylaws, gnomes, and betrayal. Their phones still had no signal, thanks to Janet's illegal but surprisingly effective signal jammer, which she powered with solar panels and a car battery stolen from her ex-husband's fishing boat. Outside, Clyde lounged in a foldable camping chair, whittling a piece of wood into the vague shape of a duck. Jake knelt beside him, editing video footage on his laptop while humming the Mission Impossible theme. Every so often, he would burst into laughter and mutter things like, "Oh man, that slow-mo glitter shot is perfect," or "Grandpa, we're going viral for sure." By mid-afternoon, a crowd had gathered on the sidewalk. Neighbors brought lawn chairs and drinks. Someone dragged out a barbecue grill. A few kids set up a lemonade stand next to the van with a handwritten sign that read "Free if you hate the HOA." Tina came outside, rubbing her temples as she surveyed the growing chaos. "Dad," she said, "this is escalating into something you can't control." "I know," Clyde replied. "Isn't it beautiful? You've turned our front yard into a political protest/carnival. Better than another garage sale." The situation inside the van had reached what Janet later referred to as critical emotional mass. The glitter bomb had left a shimmering coating on everything, and one of the HOA officers was sneezing uncontrollably, convinced he was allergic to freedom dust. Derek, now convinced he was being psychologically profiled, began cataloging the interior of the van as if it were an archaeological dig. Outside, Clyde began a mock safety demonstration, using the van as a live prop. He wore a tool belt loaded with absurd contraptions and gave loud, exaggerated instructions to the crowd. Now remember, folks, when dealing with hostile neighborhood intruders, always ensure your hammer is calibrated, your adhesive is permanent, and your conscience is clear. The crowd applauded. Someone brought a megaphone. Even Lance got involved, performing sleight-of-hand magic tricks and producing fake HOA violation tickets from people's ears. Manny, ever the ex-bureaucrat, handed out laminated pamphlets titled "Reclaim Your Lawn, a Homeowner's Guide to Resistance." Tina watched all of this from the porch, half proud and half exasperated. "This can't go on," she muttered. But it did. And it got weirder. News vans started showing up. At first, it was just a local station, but by the end of the day, there were camera crews from 3 counties and one suspiciously enthusiastic blogger who called himself the HOA Avenger. Reporters elbowed each other for a clear shot of the van, which was now festooned with sticky notes, lawn decorations, and one papier-mâché gnome holding a protest sign. A reporter with an oversized microphone approached Clyde. "Sir, do you consider this an act of protest or performance art?" Clyde didn't miss a beat. "It's an educational exhibit, real-world demonstration of what happens when rules go rogue. Isn't this illegal? So is stealing someone's wrench set because it clashes with your hedges." Inside the van, Derek was screaming. Not out of pain, just out of sheer bureaucratic frustration. "You can't do this," he shouted through the window. "This is false imprisonment." Clyde walked up and gently knocked on the glass with the handle of a hammer. "You're free to go anytime, Derek. All you have to do is admit what you did and return our tools." Derek glared at him. "You'll be hearing from our legal department." "Tell them to bring pizza," Clyde replied. Eventually, the police returned. This time, they brought more officers, a sergeant with a clipboard, and one extremely bored-looking city mediator. They listened to both sides again, but the additional evidence from Jake's video footage made it hard to ignore the truth. The HOA had broken into private property and taken tools without consent. "You could still be looking at charges," the sergeant warned Clyde. Clyde smiled. So could they. After reviewing everything, the sergeant sighed and issued the same verdict as last time. Citations all around. Clyde got dinged for unlawful detainment, unlicensed mechanical devices, and obstructing neighborhood order. Derek and his crew were cited for trespassing, theft, and instigating neighborhood unrest. The HOA, bruised and battered both figuratively and literally, retreated from the public eye. Derek refused to speak to the press. His van was towed and impounded, now registered as a community hazard, much to Janet's delight. She stood by waving as it left, wearing a tinfoil tiara and holding a balloon shaped like a lawnmower. But the real fallout wasn't legal. It was personal. The HOA lost its grip on the neighborhood. People stopped responding to their notices. Their online forums were flooded with memes of Clyde holding a hammer with captions like, "When the HOA tries it again." Jake's video went viral. Within days, it had over 1 million views, and comments poured in from people who'd lived through similar HOA nightmares. The Smith family became suburban legends. Then came the kicker. Tina received a letter in the mail, unsigned, of course. It was a formal complaint stating that due to the ongoing disruptions, the Smith household must be evaluated for community compliance. Furthermore, no residents shall harbor any individual over the age of 70 without board approval. Clyde read it, laughed, and said, "So now I'm an unauthorized elder." "What do we do?" Tina asked. "We run," Clyde said, "for office. It was Manny's idea. You want to stop them? You've got to beat them from the inside. Get on that board. Tear it down plank by plank." Tina groaned. "I already have a job, and a kid, and a father who's basically running a DIY militia." "But you also have something they don't," Manny said. "A soul." The decision was made. Tina would challenge Derek for HOA president in the upcoming election. It would be the first time in years that someone other than a clipboard-wielding tyrant had tried. And she wouldn't do it alone. Clyde assembled the team again. Operation Ballot Hammer was underway. They printed flyers. Janet created a fake campaign website for Derek full of ridiculous promises, like mandatory shrub topiary and a neighborhood anthem. Lance handed out yard signs made of recycled HOA citations. As Election Day approached, tension simmered across Sunny Ridge Acres. There were whispers of corruption, threats of disqualification, and rumors that Derek had secretly voted for his own removal during a migraine-induced lapse in judgment. But the people were watching, and Clyde was ready. The war for the soul of the neighborhood had moved from the driveway to the ballot box. But make no mistake, Grandpa still had his tools. Clyde always said that real war doesn't start with explosions. It starts with paperwork. And now, the enemy had retaliated not with hammers or chains, but with a legal document so dense and loaded with subclauses it could crush a brick. The notice came folded into a crisp white envelope marked Urgent Community Directive. Inside, the Homeowners Association, wounded and vengeful, had declared a new emergency clause. Section 7B, newly added and probably cooked up in the back of Derek's mind during his time trapped in the van, read, "All properties hosting individuals over the age of 70 are subject to mandatory inspection for structural and mental soundness." In layman's terms, they were trying to evict Grandpa Clyde on the grounds of being too old and too clever. Tina read the letter 3 times before storming into the living room and waving it in the air like a battle flag. "Dad, they're trying to exile you." Clyde didn't look up from his crossword. Then they'd better bring a forklift and a good reason. Jake leaned over her shoulder to read the letter. It literally says mental soundness. What even is that supposed to mean? "It means Derek's scared," Clyde said, still casually filling in a 10-letter word for resistance. "And when cowards get scared, they hide behind rules." The gloves were off. The HOA wasn't trying to save face anymore. They were going for Clyde's neck, his home, and his right to exist in peace. So the Smith household went underground. Not literally. Clyde's knees wouldn't allow it, but tactically. The garage became the war room. The basement, the archive. Janet donated a corkboard covered in strings and blurry photos. Lance showed up with a fog machine, which Clyde refused to allow indoors, but kept on hand in case they needed dramatic flair for presentations. They didn't just want to push back. They wanted to break the HOA from the inside. Tina's campaign for president of the association had officially launched, and what started as a neighborhood novelty had grown into a full-blown movement. People who had once lived in fear of lawn citation fines were now rallying in her driveway. Lawn signs popped up overnight like rebellious daisies. Tina for HOA president, because freedom isn't against the rules. Jake, now considered the unofficial campaign manager, created parody videos mocking Derek's ridiculous bylaws. One showed Derek inspecting a child's sidewalk chalk drawing and citing the house for unauthorized pastel defacement. Another mocked his obsession with mailbox symmetry. The internet ate it up. Clyde chuckled every time someone reposted with the caption, "Dictator Derek strikes again." Meanwhile, they dug deeper. Manny, now reinstated as their political advisor, dusted off his old files from his time as president years before Derek's reign. What they found was staggering. Budget inconsistencies, fine collection discrepancies, HOA funds being funneled into shell beautification projects that never materialized. Clyde stared at one particularly bold receipt that read, $3 500 decorative shrub analysis study. He scoffed. They're embezzling money to look at bushes. But they needed proof. Real, hard evidence. So Janet did what Janet did best, surveillance. She bugged the HOA clubhouse using a Bluetooth speaker disguised as a garden rock and tapped into their digital server using what she called her internet invisibility cloak, which was just a VPN and a disguise made of a hoodie and fake mustache. What she uncovered blew the lid off the whole operation. Emails. Audio recordings. Derek ranting about how once we get that old man out, we'll rewrite the community charter so fast as Walker will spin. That quote alone became a rallying cry. But Tina knew that wasn't enough. The people didn't just need to hate Derek. They needed to believe in something better. So she started holding neighborhood forums, potlucks, driveway meetups. She listened. She brought empathy to a war zone of petty rules and fake smiles. And Clyde, while not the face of the campaign, became its unshakable backbone. He fixed neighbors' fences. He rewired a retired teacher's garage door opener. He helped repaint a disabled vet's mailbox with non-regulation colors, smiling the whole time. Then came the bombshell. Jake, while working on a school project titled Depression in the Suburbs, accidentally uncovered a buried folder on the HOA server labeled Special Collections. Inside were documents that revealed the HOA had been selectively enforcing rules based on personal bias. People who donated to Derek's last election or were friends with the board got warning letters instead of fines. Others, especially families like the Smiths, were targeted for full punitive action. It was systemic. It was ugly. It was fuel. They brought the information to a local journalist known for investigating small-town corruption. The article dropped 2 days later under the headline, HOA or Mafia. Suburban Family uncovers rotten roots of Sunny Ridge leadership. It exploded across social media. Local officials were embarrassed. Some residents who had once feared Clyde now brought him muffins. But Derek wasn't done. He called an emergency HOA meeting and tried to paint himself as a victim of harassment. He cried on camera. Real tears. Janice from over on Sycamore bought it, but most didn't. Then he dropped his final card. He filed an injunction to cancel the HOA election, citing hostile political conditions and elder interference. It was a desperate move. It was also a mistake. Tina had come prepared. At the hearing, she stood calmly with the evidence Janet and Manny had gathered. She recited emails, quoted rules Derek had broken, and handed over financial audits that reeked of fraud. Derek's lawyer began sweating so visibly that someone in the back whispered, "Should have brought a towel." The judge ruled the election would proceed as scheduled. Derek tried to object, but was silenced by a gavel bang, so sharp it startled even Clyde. As the room cleared, Tina turned to her dad. "We're going to win." Clyde nodded, his face unreadable. "You're going to win. I'm just the decoy." Outside the courthouse, the crowd that had once doubted them now cheered. Reporters asked for statements. Clyde gave one short sentence. "Sometimes it takes a nail to fix a crooked board." Election day was approaching, but for the Smiths, the victory had already begun. They'd pierced the armor. They'd made the unseen seen. But Clyde wasn't celebrating just yet. He stood quietly on the porch that night, watching the street like a sentry. Because in war, there's always one more move. And he had one more trick left. Election day arrived not with the serenity of democratic hope, but with the chaotic buzz of a block party organized by caffeine-fueled anarchists. Clyde stood on the front porch at 6 a.m. sharp, coffee in one hand, binoculars in the other. He scanned the neighborhood like a general preparing for battle, noting every lawn sign, every suspicious movement, every HOA sticker still proudly clinging to a mailbox. It was quiet for now, but he knew that wouldn't last. Derek wouldn't go down without a spectacle. The man had a flair for the dramatic and a total misunderstanding of how badly he'd overplayed his hand. Across the street, the community center-turned-election headquarters was already bustling. Lines wrapped around the sidewalk as neighbors in lawn chairs waited for their turn to vote, some wearing Tina campaign shirts with slogans like "Power to the Porch People" and "No more lawns without justice." Jake ran around with a camera, filming testimonials and interviews for what he promised would be his magnum opus, a documentary titled The HOA Revolt, a Suburban Uprising. He even gave Clyde a wireless mic and insisted he wear it all day in case something epic happened. Clyde just grunted and clipped it to his shirt. Inside the voting area, Derek stood behind a folding table, visibly sweating through his salmon-colored dress shirt. His face wore the forced grin of a man who'd spent the night rehearsing charm in a mirror and had emerged with the personality of a wet towel. He greeted each voter with a chipper, "Let's keep the peace in peace," a slogan so weak it made people instinctively glance at the exit. Beside him sat two remaining loyalists from the old HOA guard, a woman named Marlene who once fined a neighbor for planting purple tulips instead of yellow, and a man named Greg who wore mirrored sunglasses indoors and claimed to be deeply respected in the zoning community. Tina arrived an hour later, not in heels or a pantsuit, but in jeans, sneakers, and a t-shirt that read, "My dad nailed the van shut, and all I got was democracy." The crowd burst into spontaneous applause, which embarrassed her deeply, but made Clyde smile for the first time all morning. She approached Derek, offered a handshake, and said, "Let's keep this fair." Derek took her hand with all the grace of a man shaking a live fish and replied, "Let's keep it legal." That was all Clyde needed to hear. Back at the house, Janet was running digital surveillance to ensure no vote tampering occurred. She claimed to be monitoring the Wi-Fi traffic and had launched what she called Operation Algorithmic Integrity, which seemed to involve a combination of online polling, suspiciously complex spreadsheets, and a bot that tweeted pro-Tina haikus every 7 minutes. Meanwhile, Lance prepared a victory surprise, which no one had authorized, but everyone was certain would involve pyrotechnics, and possibly a rented alpaca. The debate, scheduled for midday, was the climax everyone had been waiting for. Held in the community hall gymnasium, it was standing room only. The moderator was a retired librarian with no patience for nonsense, and a bell that she rang whenever someone talked too long or tried to redirect the question to landscaping policies. Tina spoke calmly and clearly, laying out her plan for transparency, community involvement, and a rollback of punitive enforcement. She referenced emails, audits, and actual homeowner grievances. She was compelling, relatable, and real. Derek, on the other hand, began his speech with a metaphor about termites in a wooden fence and never recovered. He shouted, gestured wildly, accused Tina of weaponizing her elderly father, and at one point, suggested that Clyde might be part of a larger domestic terror cell known as the Tool Belt Front. The crowd began to murmur. Some laughed. Someone near the back shouted, "You're losing it, Derek," and someone else threw a single gnome onto the stage, which landed with a thud next to his foot. Derek's eye twitched, his face reddened, and then, in a final spectacular act of self-destruction, he kicked the gnome. It shattered into pieces. The crowd gasped. Somewhere Janet whispered, "He broke the code." Clyde, standing in the back of the room, just nodded once. Jake, still filming, whispered into the mic, "We've crossed the Rubicon. Gnome abuse. Unforgivable." Then came the votes. People lined up, ballots in hand, many giving Tina a thumbs up or whispering encouragement. The process was slow but steady. As the final vote was cast, anticipation filled the air like static. Then, from outside, a massive puff of confetti exploded into the sky. Lance had triggered the fog machine and released 2 doves from a magician's hat. One of the doves refused to fly and simply waddled around the parking lot. The other landed on Derek's car and pooped. It took 30 minutes to count the votes. The results were announced by the same librarian, who read them without emotion but with absolute clarity. Tina Smith has won with 83% of the vote. The room erupted. Tina looked stunned. Clyde clapped twice, then muttered, "About time." Derek stormed out, tripping slightly on the gymnasium mat, and was never seen at a community meeting again. Greg removed his sunglasses. Marlene started crying and walked out whispering about non-compliant chrysanthemums. Back home, the Smiths celebrated on the porch. Neighbors dropped by with casseroles and cookies. Someone brought sparkling cider. Clyde sat in his chair, accepting congratulations like a veteran being honored by the troops. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. The war was over. The hammer had been passed, and it had landed in the right hands. Tina took a seat beside him and said, "I didn't think I could do it." Clyde looked over. "You didn't. We did." Neighborhoods aren't built on lawns and siding. They're built on people. Jake uploaded the final part of his documentary that night. It included everything: Derek's meltdown, the campaign, the shattered gnome, and Clyde's final words from the porch. If you push people long enough, eventually they push back. And sometimes they bring a nail gun. The video went viral again. Tina was invited to speak at neighborhood councils across the state. Jake got an A and a college offer based on the film alone. Clyde was asked to do interviews, but he declined them all, saying only, "I already said my piece. Now, let's enjoy the peace." Later that week, the HOA van, long impounded and left untouched, was auctioned off by the city. Clyde bought it for $20 and a toolbox full of vintage wrenches. He painted the side with bright red letters, nailed it, then he parked it in the driveway like a trophy. The battle was won, but the legacy was just beginning. The morning after the election, the sun rose gently over Sunnyridge Acres, casting soft golden light across lawns that were now free to grow just a little wild if they wanted to. There were no citations taped to doors, no clipboards in sight, and the air held that rare, almost mythical silence that only follows a storm. Clyde sat on the front porch in his usual chair, sipping coffee from a mug that read, "I warned you," and watching birds build a nest in the gutter of a neighbor's house, an act that would have once triggered a $75 fine and a neighborhood-wide email thread of panic. But not anymore. Now nobody cared. And that was exactly the way it should be. Tina came outside holding a notebook full of scribbled ideas. She was already knee-deep in reform planning, setting up neighborhood meetings, revising outdated rules, and trying to figure out how to undo years of bureaucratic nonsense without triggering another civil war. "We need a shared tool library," she said, flipping a page. "And a community garden. Maybe an open garage day where people can borrow stuff they need." The whole neighborhood's actually excited. Clyde grinned. "Told you. Give people the right to breathe, and they'll build something better." "Speaking of building," she said, pointing to the side yard, "I was thinking we rebuild the old shed. Bigger. Organized. Real workbenches." Clyde stood up slowly, cracking joints as he moved. "It's about time." Together, they walked around the side of the house to the old tool shed that had started it all, the one the HOA had raided, declared unsightly, and effectively declared war over. The door still hung crooked. Inside was mostly empty now, just the faint smell of sawdust and resistance. Clyde stepped inside and looked around. This place deserves a second life. Jake joined them, camera slung over one shoulder, phone in hand. People online are begging for updates. They want to know what happened after the election. "I think I'm going to turn this into a full documentary series." "You should," Tina said. "It might actually inspire someone." Jake paused. "Also, someone from Netflix emailed me." Clyde raised an eyebrow. "What's a Netflix?" The family laughed, and the moment settled into something that felt a little like peace. Not the boring kind. This was earned peace, hard-fought and well-deserved. It didn't mean trouble wouldn't come again, but for the first time in a long time, they were ready for it. Later that week, neighbors gathered to help clean out the shed and rebuild it. Clyde led the effort like a general overseeing his final campaign. He organized tools, measured beams, and barked orders in a tone that was firm but always followed by a smile. There were no arguments. No ridiculous fines. Just laughter, sawdust, and community. People who had barely spoken to each other before now swapped stories over power drills and paint cans. Mr. Hindley, once known only for complaining about mailbox heights, revealed he'd been a master woodworker in the 80s. Miss Clara from 3 houses down brought a box of antique nails she'd saved just in case the world needed them. Even Derek's former allies showed up, sheepishly at first, but welcomed nonetheless. By the end of the weekend, the new shed stood tall and proud. It had a lending library for tools, a whiteboard with neighborhood projects, and even a sign above the door carved by Lance that read, "The Resistance Depot." Clyde chuckled at that one, but left it up. He figured a little drama kept things interesting. One night, after the excitement died down, Jake noticed the old HOA van parked at an odd angle in the driveway. Its back doors were open. Tools were missing. But there were fresh tire tracks in the driveway leading toward the street. He followed them to the curb, where they stopped, and then disappeared. The van was gone. "Hey," he called out. "Who took the van?" Clyde walked over, hands in his pockets, smiling faintly. "I loaned it out." "To who?" "Let's just say someone who needed it more than we do. I left a little note in the glove box. Told them to pass it on when they're done." Tina gave him a look. "Are we talking about a vigilante tool-sharing van?" "I prefer mobile justice dispenser," Clyde replied. "But yeah." Rumors soon spread that the HOA van had been seen in a different suburb across town, then another one 2 counties over. Each time, it seemed to appear after reports of aggressive neighborhood rule enforcement. Each time, it left behind freshly repaired fences, community-built benches, and a sign that simply read, "Nailed it." Jake tracked it online. Someone posted a blurry video of a man who looked suspiciously like Clyde delivering a box of screwdrivers in the dead of night, wearing a hoodie and boots, then vanishing into the dark. It became a meme. Grandpa Justice, they called him. Hashtags exploded. Interviews were requested. Clyde declined them all. He wasn't looking for fame. He just wanted people to take care of each other. And maybe, once in a while, hammer something back into place. As the weeks passed, life in Sunnyridge found a new rhythm. Tina balanced her job and her new role with grace, organizing projects that actually helped people instead of penalizing them. Jake submitted his documentary to a national student film competition and won first place. They got a call from a well-known talk show. Tina laughed so hard she almost choked on her coffee. Even Janet calmed down. Well, slightly. She still wore the tinfoil hat, but now it had campaign pins and a small solar panel powering a fan. Lance started offering free magic shows for neighborhood kids. Manny finally retired from activism and opened a miniature lemonade stand just because he said it felt good to serve something sweet. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, Clyde sat on the porch alone. The breeze was warm, and the street was quiet. He took a slow breath and looked out over everything. Lawns a little messy, kids a little louder, neighbors a little kinder. Tina joined him with 2 mugs of tea. She handed him one and leaned back. "Feels good," she said. "Yeah," Clyde nodded. "But don't get too comfortable. Peace is just the space between the next round of nonsense." She smirked. "You think they'll try to bring the HOA back?" "They might. Or it'll be something new. But now we know what to do." They sipped their tea as dusk settled in. A dog barked in the distance. Somewhere a lawnmower started up. Clyde smiled. He'd won a war with nails, wit, and the quiet certainty that no rule should ever matter more than people. And, in the end, that was the only rule worth enforcing.